Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications with AVWE, joined by Scott Dunford, pastor of Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. And Nathan Sloan, you are pastor at Sojourn in Louisville, but you are also president?
Executive
Director of Upstream Sending and the Upstream Collective, is that right?
Yeah, so we have kind of two branches of our ministry. I lead Upstream Sending, and then Larry McCrary leads the collective.
Great, awesome. And we are together here at Together for the Gospel in Louisville, your home turf. And first of all, just reintroduce us, because it's been a little while since we've had you on the show, to the Upstream Collective and what Upstream Sending is doing now, too.
Okay. Yeah, so the Upstream Collective is a ministry that seeks to empower the church to send well globally and locally. It started 12 years ago from two missionaries who were living in Spain, who were receiving mission teams, and they were engaging with missionaries. The mission teams were often not trained well to come, and the missionaries were often orphaned from their sending churches. So just had this heart to develop U.S. churches and North American churches to send well. So creating resources and books and coaching mission pastors. And then maybe 2 years ago, as we were coaching churches, we realized that they had a desire to work with agencies that really gave them ownership, put them in the driver's seat of sending. So we decided to start a wing of our ministry that does that.
That's fantastic. And if you have not gone to the Upstream Collective and checked out the resources there, I mean, we end up finding guests off the Upstream Collective. You know, like we had Ryan Martin wrote for you guys, and we had a great interview with him, and just find really good content there. So thank you for that. And you've got some exciting news that you're working on that's going to be coming out really soon. Can you tell us about what you've been working on most recently?
Yeah, so in August I'm coming out with a book. It's called You Are Sent, Finding Your Place in God's Global Kingdom. And the idea was maybe 3 years ago, I was sitting in a meeting with other mission pastors who were sending significant numbers from their churches, and they had looked at all these resources about how to mobilize and then develop people for cross-cultural service, and either they were too academic, too expensive, or they weren't robust enough. And the other critique we heard was they weren't actually built for the church. They were built maybe to be used in a nonprofit. So I just thought, man, we have that same need at Sojourn Church. So what if we wrote that? So over the course of 18 months, we wrote a curriculum, 9 weeks, that churches can use, whether it's one-on-one discipleship, small group, or in a classroom setting. And we go from biblical basis of missions, theology of missions, history of missions, all the way through like how to live out the gospel in your everyday life and the movement toward the nations. Because that was the other myth I wanted to bust, is we separate those, right? Like, well, you can plant a church in California, or you could share the gospel with your neighbor, or you could go cross-culturally.
Right.
But often we don't realize is that skill set, that living out missionally is the same wherever you go. Now there's nuance, right? You're learning languages and stuff, but you had to learn a culture, right?
Oh yeah, and I'm still learning a culture.
Yeah, and I'm learning a culture too.
It's very dynamic. Yeah, Louisville's changing, Fremont's changed dramatically, even in the 3 years I've been there. Yeah,
I live 12 blocks from the convention center in a predominantly African-American community. And we're 12 years in our neighborhood, we're still learning culture. Still learning how to love our neighbors and reach out to our neighbors. So I want to bring those worlds together and empower the church to live sent.
That's beautiful.
Now, you also started Upstream Sending out of the Upstream Collective, and that was a resource ministry primarily, and now you're also sending missionaries. So, devil's advocate, there's a lot of missions agencies. Why do we need another one? What's unique about Upstream Sending?
I don't think we need another sending organization, but there are some churches who maybe are a little bit more mature or desire to grow in their ability to send. So they maybe have some systems and structures, or they want to take more ownership. So it was those churches. And specifically the idea came from the 350 churches that we are serving at a higher capacity at the collective. They're saying, man, I really wish there was an organization that put us in the driver's seat, that they let us lead out in care or pre-field training or whatever, all these elements. Each church is different. So I kept hearing that over and over and again as I was coaching mission pastors. So in a board meeting, I was like, hey guys, like, I know we don't want to be a sending organization, but what if we created a sending arm that allowed us to serve churches who wanted more ownership? So all that to say, in that meeting, I was like, hey, I think we should do it, but I think it's a horrible idea. Because there's over 1,000 sending organizations in the U.S. alone. So our desire is not to help everybody send, or we know we're not a fit for every church, but there are churches who do want to take the reins of sending and say, we have a voice, we want a seat at the table. So those are the churches we're seeking to serve.
Well, one of the things I appreciate about you is, one, you've got a breadth of experience from being a missionary in a restricted access situation to pastoring a church that's become a pretty dynamic sending force. My daughter's a member of Sojourn Midtown, so I'm kind of biased towards you guys. I really appreciate anyone who loves your kids and helps them to grow in Christ. You're super thankful for. So I'm just curious, how has your background as a missionary and then background as a missions pastor and a professor, how does that kind of come together to shape what you're doing now? How do those different areas inform your role now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And some of that has to do with ABWE.
Yeah.
I was a missionary for 4 years with ABWE, and it was very transformative for my life. I still feel like I'm part of the family.
Yeah.
But what was happening is I was serving in Nepal, and I was getting to go into the mountains and train pastors and do some amazing things. And that was my heart's desire as a believer. But I came back to get some theological training. And as we were doing that, I was reading through the book of Acts. I got to Acts 11, 12, 13, all the way to 18. And I saw this church, the church in Antioch, and how they sent. They were worshiping the Lord. They were fasting, they were praying. And God called them to send out some of their best. And I know when I looked at my wife and I's story, that wasn't our experience. We had churches that loved us. Mm-hmm. We got to serve faithfully with them, but we weren't sent. We were kind of sent and let go, but we wanted to be a part of a church that sent us and stayed with us.
Yeah.
That cared about our ministry, that cared about the people that we cared about. So it was at that point we kind of came on staff at Sojourn and got to build some of the vision that came out of Acts 13. So from day one, to me it was about developing long-term missionaries. And then it was about carrying long-term missionaries.
Yeah.
And then it was doing conflict resolution. It was all the mess a mission pastor or a mission leader does. And that's just developed over time to I think there's a place for local churches to take real ownership in global missions. And some of that's the church landscape has changed. More staff have global experience, or more staff are reading and learning and come to things like this, and they can really speak into the lives of people.
Yeah.
So I think this is the next iteration of kind of the movement and sending.
That's great.
But what about, because you mentioned churches that are a little more mature, that want more ownership, that feel a high degree of responsibility for sending. What about the church that's small, that doesn't have a full-time staff missions pastor? Maybe they don't even have a really strong lay leader that's leading a missions team or committee of some sort. How would they get engaged? What is the step for them to get to that point to where, like you're describing in Acts 13, there's a natural overflow into sending where there's a tight relationship and they're holding the rope well?
Yeah. Well, I think there is a difference between size and maturity. Some of the better sending churches I know are 100 people. So there's a church here in Louisville, and there are 120 people. They've sent out 17% of their congregation, and they live and breathe this. Now, it comes with significant sacrifice.
Yeah.
If you send out 17% of your congregation, it actually hurts, right? Legitimately hurts. But they're living out the conviction they believe. They have a lay leader leading that ministry. So it's possible. Now, it is harder. It's harder to lead a good missions program, movement, whatever you want to call it, with the staff not involved. But I would say if maybe you're just beginning to discover the sending church concept, you want your church to grow in this, maybe you don't have a lay leader, I think jumping in with Upstream Collective will be helpful. We have a blog we publish 3 to 5 times a week. We have several books. There's a book called The Sending Church Defined, which is kind of our manifesto of why churches are called to send. And then we have all kinds of resources, from sending church pipelines to how to care during crisis to TCK education, all those kinds of resources that are available to churches.
Beautiful.
Yeah. How can people find out? What's the website address? What's your Twitter handle? Best way for people to get a hold of your resources?
Yeah, so upstreamsending.com is our website. There's some contact information, and then you can see some of our distinctives on there. And then actually next Wednesday, we're launching the ministry fully to our churches. So the way the ministry works is we actually partner with the church and then with the missionary. So let's say you wanted to be a missionary through us. That'd be weird, but let's just say you were. And you reached out to us, we'd say, hey man, we need to talk to your church first. Yeah. And we actually have an onboarding process for the church. So if you're a mission pastor or a church leader, you would connect with us, and then once we partner together, then you could start sending your people
cool.
through our organization. So website's the best place, and then it's relationship, it's conversation. So let's just get on the phone and let's talk. What's God doing in your church, and then how can we help serve you?
It's beautiful.
Awesome. Glad you're a part of the extended ABWE family.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for coming on today.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, appreciate you as well. And thank you for watching.